Hello and welcome to the Fifth Down Huddle here following week 2 of the 2020 season. A lot happened this week, but before we get into it, welcome to the Fifth Down Huddle. Check out the Instagram and the Twitter page for everything NFL. Check out the YouTube page for podcasts, game recaps, and other fantasy tips and tricks, as well as game predictions. Check out Spotify for full podcasts, and let's huddle up. Get right into it. So first off this week, let's talk about the insane amount of injuries that have hit the NFL so far in week 2. And in my eyes, these injuries are arguably having an at least equal effect on the league as COVID-19 has in terms of players not being there to play. I mean, first off, Panthers running back Christian McCaffrey is out for 2 to 6 weeks. This will hurt the Panthers big time. I mean, the Panthers are not one-dimensional by any means, but Christian McCaffrey is the key in the ignition of that offense. With McCaffrey gone, I have a serious worry for Teddy Bridgewater's performance in the upcoming weeks. McCaffrey is simply a workhorse, and that offense basically runs through him more than it even runs through the quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater. Don't expect the Panthers to win next week considering this huge loss. Next up, Michael Thomas is expected to miss 2 to 4 weeks. Not as big of a loss in terms of time, but Michael Thomas had just 3 receptions for 17 yards against the Bucs, a real letdown. And without Michael Thomas, the Saints lost by 10 to the Raiders. So considering the fact that the Saints still won that first game, this loss isn't a make-or-break thing. But the Saints will still need to find offensive success going forward. They found relative offensive success against the Raiders, but especially late in the game, they weren't able to consistently move the ball well. Opposing defenses have less to worry about now. I think that helped the Raiders in the long run. It makes it harder for Breeze to find open receivers consistently. He's been throwing really inaccurately these last 2 weeks. Really inaccurately, especially for a quarterback like Drew Brees, who is considered to be one of the top quarterbacks in the league. Now, along with this, running back Philip Lindsay of the Broncos is out for 2 to 4 weeks as well. Lindsay had just 24 yards in his 2020 debut, despite coming off of 2 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. But Melvin Gordon has done well in the wake of Lindsay's absence, so I don't expect this to hurt the Broncos too much in the short term. Now, on the other hand, the Broncos lost 2 other key offensive pieces. Courtland Sutton, the Broncos' number 1 receiver, is out for the season. So this is going to force Jerry Jeudy, the first-round pick for the Broncos, into the starting role well before he's ready for it in my eyes. You don't want a first-round rookie wide receiver being forced into a number 1 role against the other team's best corner every single game. Now, the year 1 receiver will have to take over the starting role, and if not the starting role, then he's still going to have to he's just going to have a larger role overall, even if he doesn't take over the starting position in terms of that number 1 spot. And the loss of the Broncos' starting quarterback, Drew Lock, for 3 to 5 weeks won't help the situation. I mean, you guys remember, I love Drew Lock. I loved how he looked at the end of last season when he played in those 5 games, and I honestly really liked how he was looking coming into this year. He didn't have an amazing first game, but he didn't have a bad first game either. He played relatively well for a second-year quarterback, and I was excited to see what the Broncos could do this season. But now that Drew Lock is out, I mean, you gotta worry. Now, Jeff Driscoll didn't play terrible in week 2, coming in as the backup. He's forced in the starting position. He didn't play terrible, but without Drew Lock and without Courtland Sutton and without Philip Lindsay, I don't know. I do not see the Broncos doing super well in these next few weeks. Now, the 49ers are another team to suffer multiple losses early in the season, with star defensive end and projected defensive player of the year Joey Bosa out for the year with a torn ACL, and Jimmy Garoppolo looking at a 4 to 6 week absence due to injury as well. Now, with a key defensive loss and the 49ers losing their starting quarterback, I don't expect them to win all of their next 4 games. And if Jimmy G is out against the Patriots 5 weeks from now, expect them to lose that game as well. Saquon Barkley is also out for the season with a torn ACL. The top-tier running back has suffered the second large injury in his short career. Now, some other key names that are out either for the year or for a shorter period. Center Mike Pouncey for the Chargers is out for a year. He's a big name on that team. A.J. Brown of the Titans, he isn't out for the year. He's out for a few weeks, but still a big player there. Linebacker Bruce Irvin of the Seahawks is out for the year. He's a key pass rusher for that team. And we saw they were practically unable to get pressure on Cam Newton on Sunday. So that's really frightening for the Seahawks. Considering, I mean, they were stretching it all the way down to rookies. They threw a rookie, I think, late in the game into the role to try and get some pressure on Cam Newton. Even that didn't work. So now that Bruce Irvin's gone, they got to find a way to get pressure on the quarterback fast. Now, Anthony Barr of the Vikings is also out for the year. He's a key defensive player for the Vikings, a defense that has struggled through the first 2 weeks, allowing over 40 points in their first match and over 25 points in their second matchup against the Colts, in which they let up 28. So now that we're past those injuries, let's get into the game recaps. I'm not going to recap every single game this week on this podcast, that is. I will there's going to be 4 games I don't recap today, and those 4 games, I'll give you the names, or you'll pretty much realize it anyways. You can look in the description if you really want to know. But those 4 games I won't recap because they were kind of boring, not really a big-time matchup. There isn't a whole ton to talk about in those games, so I won't cover them. The games with a lot of injuries, the games where it was close, where there's a lot to talk about, a lot at stake, I'll talk about those this week. But in the end, I will post all of the recaps on YouTube, so if your team isn't on this podcast and you were hoping they would be, check out the YouTube page and you'll find them there by midday Wednesday. Now, first off, let's look at the Thursday night matchup between the Bengals and the Browns. One hell of a game. And quite honestly, I'd call it the best game of the season up to this point if it weren't for the Seahawks-Pats game and the Falcons-Cowboys game. Joe Burrow was, I mean, how do I put it, not just impressive, but outright great. Especially for his age. I mean, Burrow made a number of great reads, often reading the blitz and still working through 2 to 3 reads. And when they weren't blitzing, Burrow often found the open man almost every single time. Burrow, while he made some rookie mistakes, I mean, come on, it's his second career start, looked incredibly sharp and decisive even despite facing a 16 to 28 point deficit. I mean, he was simply incredible in my eyes, and in my eyes, yes, I'm seeing all of this in a relative point of view. But even outside of that relative, oh, he's a rookie, this is really good for a rookie mindset, he still looked incredible. I mean, if you throw that away and think of him as a third-year quarterback, he threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 picks after being asked to throw 61 times. That's still great. And then you go back to that relative mindset, which is the mindset you should have because it's true. When you ask your rookie quarterback to throw 61 times in just his second career game, and he doesn't throw a single pick, along with 3 touchdowns and 300 yards, I mean, you've got your man. And when I watched the game on Thursday, I wasn't just impressed. In fact, I believed. Again, the stats are great, but it goes beyond that. Burrow has faced adversity, including getting pressured a lot on Thursday night, and has shown that despite a handful of rookie mistakes, he's been the man for the Bengals. He's carried that offense. Now, on the flip side, there were some negatives for the Bengals in Week 2. First off, they lost. But was that necessarily unexpected? I mean, the Bengals fans aren't pushing for a playoff berth in 2020. They're pushing for a berth of a new age in Cincinnati that is going to be led by Burrow in future years. I don't think anyone was expecting the Bengals to make a push for the playoffs this year, and I still don't think they will. But hey, if Joe Burrow can keep playing like this, you never know. Now, along with this, the Bengals struggled to protect Burrow, as I said earlier. It wasn't as much the Browns' D-line as it seemed to be the Bengals' O-line just falling asleep play after play. I mean, Burrow basically got bullied by his own O-line. Every other play reminded me of a scene from Adam Sandler's The Yard, the movie where he portrays an NFL quarterback sent to prison and co-stars with Chris Rock as he builds a football team in the prison system. And the scene I'm thinking of is when the O-line just stands up and lets everyone through simply to punish Adam Sandler for trying to throw the game. Now, granted, the O-line of the Bengals should be thanking Joe Burrow for putting on a show on Thursday night, but in my eyes, if that's what they were trying to do, they did a terrible job showing it. Overall, though, the Bengals looked impressive for the Bengals. They weren't playing a superstar team, but they weren't playing against a dumpster fire of a team either. Joe Burrow looked good, and honestly, this season, up to this point, there aren't that many dumpster fire of a teams as we usually see. Pretty much every team up to this point has showed signs of ability to compete. Even the Eagles, who right now are playing pretty terrible offensively and defensively, honestly. So, I mean, we expected the Washington football team to be, next to a dumpster fire team, and they won a game. They're playing relatively competitive. They're moving the ball. Dwayne Haskins is playing better than expected. I mean, the Bengals were kind of expected to be one of those teams, and they've played relatively well. The Dolphins were expected to be that. They've played relatively well. They just only lost by 3 to the Bills, and the only game that they really got pummeled was against one of the best, if not the best, secondary in the league with Fitzmagic, which is kind of expected. So the Dolphins aren't necessarily a dumpster fire of a team right now. They're competing. They competed against the Bills, 28-31 this Sunday. So, again, Joe Burrow looked good, and the Bengals, along with their fans, should be pumped for the future. They weren't playing a dumpster fire of a team. They were playing a solid team in the Browns, a solid roster, and they competed big time. 35-30, Joe Burrow looked next to great, next to perfect, honestly. It's a stretch to say he's perfect, but he played perfect for a rookie quarterback in his second start. Honestly, I think that is above any ceiling I would have expected for that game. It's really surprising overall, really, to see the Bengals ask Joe Burrow to throw it 61 times in a game. I mean, how often do you see a team ask a quarterback to throw 61 times in just his second career start? You're asking for trouble there. But apparently, Cincinnati liked what they saw with Burrow, and they trusted him doing that. And honestly, as the game went on, it wasn't one of those scenarios where you could really tell how many throws Burrow was making. It didn't look like they were just throwing incompletion after incompletion, and the run was just getting stuffed and stuffed. It wasn't necessarily that. It was more that Burrow was connecting on his throws. But a lot of them were, those 3 to 5 yard plays, and they add up after a long time, especially considering how many long drives Burrow put up. So I don't think they went into this game thinking Burrow was going to throw it 61 times. I just think that as the game evolved, as the game went on, Burrow was hitting these throws to these receivers. The Browns weren't finding ways to shut down these short routes, and the Bengals feasted on it. They put up 30 points. So, again, Joe Burrow looked good, and the Bengals, along with their fans, should be pumped for the future. I'm pumped for Joe Burrow. I'm pumped for this team. I said before the season that Joe Burrow had a 60% chance of being a bust, considering he was on the Bengals, 40% chance of having a Peyton Manning-type career. And honestly, I'm leaning more towards, 45-55. It's getting closer. Now, after 2 games, I'm not going to jump the gun and say I'm going to lay the odds for Burrow to have a Peyton Manning-like career, but hey, his first 2 games have shown that he is probably not going to be a bust if he can replicate this performance well into the future. Now, on the other hand, let's look at the Cleveland Browns. The Browns didn't disappoint. They found rhythm both through the air and on the ground, and quite honestly, I'd say the Browns were at their best I've ever seen them live. You got to remember, this Thursday night game was one hell of a game to watch. Both offenses looked great. The Browns' run game was next to impossible to stop. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt combined for over 200 yards collectively, creating 2 strong ground threats that the Bengals just couldn't seem to find an answer for. The pass game was also impressive as Baker Mayfield played relatively well, especially in comparison to Week 1 with 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Granted, nowhere near Burrow's performance, but good nonetheless, especially considering how focused the Browns were on the ground attack rather than the air raid offense. Now, Chubb was far and away the front runner in the Browns running back duo with more carries and over 40 more yards along with 2 touchdowns compared to Hunt's 1. And Chubb showed more fight than Hunt in terms of yards after contact, constantly fighting for the extra couple of yards on every carry. Mayfield and Odell Beckham connected for a deep touchdown pass relatively early, which is good considering recent trade rumors stating that Beckham was being shopped by the Browns. And Odell ended the day with 4 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown, leading the team in receiving yards. So it kind of looks like Odell's not going to be traded anytime soon. And honestly, I wasn't buying those trade rumors right off the bat anyways. I mean, you can pretty much mark it on your calendar that every season at least once there's going to be rumors that Odell Beckham is going to get traded out of Cleveland. I mean, it's always going to be there, and this year it was again. I don't think he's getting traded, especially after last Thursday. Now, Mayfield looked best on play action, and it wasn't close in terms of his performance in other sets. Mayfield went 4 for 5 for 87 yards and a touchdown out of play action. Surprisingly, though, the Browns seemed to abandon this set later on in the game, though I'm not sure why. I hope the Browns rely on this, especially considering their two running backs are performing well, as I really feel like it could open up this offense against tougher teams. Baker Mayfield has proved on several occasions that play-action throwing offense is where he performs best. And I really hope that the Browns, now that they especially have two great running threats, start to attack that more. It works for them. They've got to attack it more. Now, the next game up is the Bears against the Giants. It was a slugfest and featured a brutal injury that NFL fans hate to see. The Giants quarterback Daniel Jones struggled on Sunday against the Bears defense, something I expected, which is why I had the Bears defense starting in fantasy, and they got me 23 points. Now, Jones threw just 240 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick in Sunday's matchup, and failed to move the ball consistently and effectively. Saquon's injury is probably the biggest story coming from the Giants team, as he is officially out for the remainder of the season. I mean, he's a true playmaker for the Giants, and I truly believe this loss makes the playoffs next to impossible for the Giants this season. Granted, Saquon didn't play well in week 1, but that O-line was the main reason for that. Saquon was getting touched before he even made it to the line of scrimmage on every other run. Now, what this does open up, though, is room for Dion Lewis, who had 14 touches in the wake of Saquon's injury, to show himself as a true running back option, not only for the Giants, but for other teams heading into this offseason. Lewis hasn't found much top-tier success in the NFL outside of New England, so it'll be great to see him get another chance with the Giants. And for fantasy owners who lost to Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, Dion Lewis is a brilliant pickup. He shines in the pass game, but will now have to cover for the majority of the run game, though the Giants did just sign Devontae Freeman, so give it a week or two in order for us to really see who's going to lead that Giants run game. For this week, if you lost Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley in fantasy, pick up Dion Lewis, just because I don't think Devontae Freeman's going to be completely up to speed in 3 days before their next matchup. I don't think he's going to be there yet. So pick up Dion Lewis just for now, just for this week. He's going to lead in running back touches this week. That's pretty much a guarantee. Considering Daniel Jones hasn't been playing amazing, they're going to run the ball. And at the very least, Dion Lewis is a pretty solid pass catcher as a running back. But maybe after next week, you might want to switch it up a bit. See, pay attention to those practices. Pay attention to those reports on Devontae Freeman, because give it a week and a half, and he could very well be the lead back for the Giants in the run game. They could very well start running a running back duo between Dion Lewis and Devontae Freeman. Dion Lewis covering the pass game, Devontae Freeman covering the run game. Now expect Dion Lewis to put up a solid 10 to 15 points a game on average in PPR leagues with the loss of Saquon for as long as Dion Lewis is the starting back. But again, the Giants are pretty much out of the playoff picture now unless Dion Lewis, Devontae Freeman, or Daniel Jones start putting up great numbers. I'm sorry, Giants fans, but with Daniel Jones not impressing in these first 2 weeks, and with Saquon out, I mean, it's really hard for me to say the Giants make the playoffs this season. But they could surprise me. Any team can at this point. Now, on the other hand, the Bears' offense didn't impress. After a great Week 1 performance, I was expecting Trubisky to have a solid game this week at the least. He disappointed, though, with 2 interceptions and 2 touchdowns. I was truly rooting for him this week, and I hope this isn't a sign that Trubisky is moving back towards the Trubisky of last season. I mean, for the Bears, the run game wasn't astounding either. Granted, they got over 100 yards on the ground, but coupled with just 190 through the air against the Giants' defense, it's simply not going to be enough offensive production to get this team into the playoffs. I'm genuinely worried for the Bears moving forward. I mean, their defense played great, but it was against the Giants without Saquon, so what do you really expect? I mean, they played the Lions and the Giants. They almost lost against the Lions, and they didn't play great against the Giants. I mean, the Bears and Trubisky need to find consistency. Otherwise, I would be counting the Bears out of the playoffs by week 6. I mean, they're 2-0 just because of the teams they've played against. They haven't played amazing. They definitely got to improve their game if they expect to make the playoffs this season. Next up, we've got the Rams against the Eagles. The Rams offense played a hell of a game, with Jared Goff throwing up 3 touchdowns and just 7 incompletions and over 250 yards, along with 0 interceptions. The run game was also on point with nearly 200 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Once you put 2 and 2 together, the Rams put up 37 points on what seemed to be a helpless Eagles team, especially that defense. Not to mention the Rams defense also played well. Despite the 0 sack count, they hauled in 2 interceptions on Wentz as well as holding the quarterback out of the end zone, so clearly the Rams were simply the better team in this matchup. Not to mention, the Rams, whom many predicted not to make the playoffs in 2020, are 2-0. And the Eagles, whom many predicted to make the playoffs, are 0-2. The Rams starting off 2-0 is big as they face 2 solid rosters in the Cowboys and the Eagles, and it's tough to give the Rams a win or even a loss next week against the Bills, but either way, the Rams should end up with a 4-1 record at the end of Week 5, even with a loss against the Bills. A great and relatively unexpected way for the Rams to start the 2020 season. The Eagles, on the other hand, seemed lost. Wentz seems lost early in the season, starting out with 4 interceptions to just 2 touchdowns. Not to mention he has failed to move the ball consistently through the air throughout Week 1 and 2. And in Week 1, it seemed like a large part of the blame fell on the Eagles' O-line, allowing 8 sacks. But here in Week 2, it seems a bit more questionable as to who the blame should be on, as Wentz wasn't sacked once, yet played worse than last week. The run game for the Eagles was relatively average. I mean, it wasn't enough to pull the Eagles out of the hole they dug themselves into at all, but it wasn't terrible. Sanders ran for 95 yards on 20 carries with a touchdown, but with a pretty much unreliable pass game, you need to find a way to get more chunk runs with Sanders. The Eagles' defense didn't help the scenario, allowing 37 points overall, and while the run game was average, the Eagles failed in pretty much all phases of the game. This game wasn't just lost by Wentz, but it was truly a team effort. Sanders did the best he could, but it simply wasn't enough. Don't expect the Eagles to perform well into the future, starting 0-2 and facing the suddenly threatening Bengals, injured 49ers, and the Ravens. A game they should lose. I'd expect the Eagles to be somewhere around 1-4 by Week 5, possibly 2-3. Next up, we've got one hell of a game with the Falcons and the Cowboys. I was only able to catch the second half of this game live, but I'm happy I did. This was arguably the craziest game up to this point in the season, and as Falcons fans, I mean, they had to relive Super Bowl 51 pretty much by letting up a multiple possession lead late. I mean, I figured the Falcons were past this. I figured they learned their lesson, but apparently not. Now, the Falcons played relatively well, at least their offense did. They put up 39 points, 4 touchdowns through the air for Matt Ryan with 0 picks, along with over 100 yards on the ground as a team. The offense definitely wasn't lackluster, as any time a team puts up 39 points, it's hard to find an argument for the idea that the offense wasn't playing well, or even that the offense was the reason the team lost. Now, what wasn't playing well for the Falcons was defense and late-game execution. Their defense let up 40 points, and their hands team let up an onside kick when onside kicks nowadays are practically impossible to recover, and they didn't even put a hand on the ball. There was under a minute left. The Cowboys were down by 1 with no timeouts after a long drive, and an onside recovery would have won the Falcons the game. Instead, they let it inch 10 yards in probably the slowest onside kick I've ever seen. And I'm not sure what the hands team for the Falcons was thinking on that play, and maybe I'll never know. But for whatever reason, they barely contested the onside kick. The defense for the Falcons was asleep for a good portion of that game, with just 1 sack and 0 picks, letting Dak Prescott throw for 450 yards on the day. So after letting up 2 straight 38-point games, one of the Seahawks and one of the Cowboys, I think it's fair to say that any offense can find success against what seems to be just an absolutely terrible defense for the Falcons. And I hate to call it quits on a team so early in the season, but if the Falcons can't find a way to start locking up that secondary, they will not make a push for the playoffs this season. Sure, the offense looked solid, but that doesn't mean much if your defense is consistently letting up 38 points a game. Now, on the other hand, we've got the Cowboys, whose defense didn't play much better overall. Again, just 1 sack and 0 picks against that Falcons offense isn't going to play well going into the future. The Cowboys need to come back from this week with a much more sound defensive performance against the Seahawks, and they need to get some more turnovers if they expect to win that game, which is a stretch in the first place. In the end, though, I have to give Dak Prescott credit for playing as well as he did. I mean, he threw 450 yards with no picks. The touchdown game wasn't great, but he threw 450 yards. Not to mention the comeback that was won by a solid pass to CeeDee Lamb to set up a game-winning field goal. I mean, Dak Prescott came in clutch. Something else I'd like to note here is that CeeDee Lamb is already looking extremely impressive early on this season, especially with a clutch grab like that late in the game. I mean, it's not just that grab either. I mean, he's put up solid stats for a rookie receiver. I'm impressed with him. And Cowboys fans should be too. He looks like he could be the future number one receiver for this team. And overall, the Cowboys finished the game while the Falcons were unable to hold themselves together. And in typical Falcons fashion, that was kind of expected. But the Cowboys should lose next week against the Seahawks, theoretically, and I expect this Cowboys team to be somewhere around 3-2 at the end of Week 5. Now next up, we've got the Jets and the 49ers, an extremely tough day for both teams, despite the 49ers putting up 31 points and winning. The 49ers won this game on the scoreboard, but arguably lost their season in the end. Star defensive end Nick Bosa was injured in this game and is expected to miss the remainder of the 2020 season with a torn ACL. Defensive lineman Solomon Thomas is also believed to have suffered a torn ACL this weekend, which keeps him out for the rest of the season. George Kittle missed last game with an injury, but he is expected to play in Week 3. Deebo Samuel is also currently out with an injury, but could return as soon as Week 4. Jimmy Garoppolo, the 49ers starting quarterback, suffered an injury, which is expected to sideline him for 4 to 6 weeks. And not to mention, Raheem Mostert suffered an MCL sprain and is likely going to miss the upcoming matchup, so clearly a tough day for the 49ers, even with the win over the Jets. Nick Mullins didn't do great once pushed into the starting role, just 71 yards and a pick on 11 throws. The run game was there, but Tevin Coleman ran the ball 14 times for just 12 yards and no touchdowns, although McKinnon and Mostert were both far more productive. Mostert with 92 yards and a touchdown on 8 carries, and McKinnon with 77 yards and a touchdown on just 3 carries. Now with Mostert out, Coleman will need to find ways to be more productive in Week 3. The 49ers are catching a bit of a break, though, as they will be facing the Giants this upcoming week, a good team to help these backup players to get used to taking over those starting roles. For the Jets, things looked more the same. Offensively, the Jets have yet to break 20 points in either of their first 2 matchups, and I will say some of this is simply due to the high-level defenses they played. Overall, though, an offense that can only put up 17 and 13 points against the 49ers and the Bills is nowhere near making the playoffs. Darnold once again failed to impress, throwing for under 200 yards and just 1 touchdown. The run game was average at best, as Frank Gore ran an ugly 3-yard per carry average on 21 carries. Through the air, Chris Hogan looked good for the first time since he's been with the Patriots. Finally showing that he can succeed outside of the system as he hauled in 75 yards on 6 catches, leading the Jets receivers in both categories on Sunday. And defensively, they let up 31 points. They were able to snatch an interception off of Mullins, though, along with 3 sacks. Nothing insanely impressive, but it was nice to see the Jets getting pressure on the opposing quarterback this week. Overall, the Jets look like the Jets, and as I said before the season, I just don't believe that the Darnold-Yates duo is going to make any sort of playoff run in the near future. Now next up, we've got the Jags against the Titans, a game that surprised me quite a bit in terms of just how close it is and how well Minshew played for the second week in a row. Gardner Minshew disappointed in the sense that he wasn't as wildly accurate, nor was he as safe with the ball. Even with this, though, Minshew still impressed. He threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in total. But not great when you factor in the 2 picks. But the production offensively with 30 points gives me the idea that Minshew gets about a C grade for this game. Had the offense not been productive through the air, it'd be more like a D- or an F grade overall for Minshew, but they were. Through the first 2 weeks, Minshew has looked impressive, and I think Jaguars fans, along with NFL fans in general, are a bit surprised with just how competitive the Jags seem to be against the Titans, losing just 30-33. The ground game was also there as James Robinson put up over 100 yards and a touchdown for the Jags alone on the ground. And defensively, the Jags looked a bit slow and definitely couldn't find a way to force Tannehill into making many mistakes overall. Not to mention, they didn't exactly stop the ground game with Henry as he put up 84 yards overall, but I will admit, they were able to keep Henry from getting a ton of chunk runs with just 3.4 yards per carry. And overall, the Jags look solid right now. And their 1-1 record is about where I'd expect a team like this to be in Week 2. As for the Titans, well, things looked up through the air. As I said before, Tannehill threw nearly perfectly, with 4 touchdowns to no picks and a strong completion percentage. He seemed to be more comfortable this week than last, and I hope that the Titans can sustain this quarterback play moving forward, seeing as Henry hasn't exactly been dominant on the ground when you look at his yards per attempt averages. Defensively, the Titans struggled to hold back the Jags offensively through pure yards, letting up 480 total yards and 6.8 yards per play to the Jags. Now, what saved them were the 2 interceptions that kept the Jags from putting up over 40 points. Not to mention, the Titans also caught a break with the penalties, as the Jags lost 60 yards throughout the day in penalties alone. And overall, the Titans' pass game looked promising, the defense looked nervous, and the run game needs to become more reliable in terms of production. Next up, let's talk about a disheartening game for all fans of football, the Broncos against the Steelers. Big Ben looked like Big Ben, as per the usual this season, but the Broncos underwent some huge changes early. For one, Drew Lock got knocked out of the matchup with an injury after throwing just 5 times for 20 yards, 4 of them being incompletions. Drew Lock is looking to be out for around 4 to 5 weeks according to reports, but according to those same reports, Drew Lock is making a push to get back as soon as he can, possibly even sooner than that. So, let's talk about a Drew Lock-less, Courtland Sutton-less Broncos team after seeing them lose by 5 to the Steelers. I mean, the backup for the Broncos and now seemingly the starter for this foreseeable future, Jeff Driscoll, played relatively well for the situation he was put into. He threw 2 touchdowns and a pick and over 200 yards total. It's not like he played terribly or just absolutely let up a shutout. The Broncos team stayed competitive, giving themselves a shot all the way up to the final minutes. With Courtland Sutton now out, though, I don't expect the Broncos to win too many games until Drew Lock returns. Before the season, I had the Broncos making the playoffs at 7-9, and with Drew Lock out for an extended period of time, that prediction is becoming less and less likely, and I'm getting close to taking it back. I'll give it another game, though, just to see if Jerry Jeudy can help elevate Driscoll to the challenge, and if the Broncos can win just enough games without Lock to keep them in the running for the playoffs. As for the Steelers, things are looking good in terms of their ability to make it to the playoffs. Overall, they're 2-0, and their offense has been playing well. James Conner didn't show up in Game 1, but here in Week 2, he proved to us that he's still the number 1 man for the Steelers, rushing for over 100 yards and a touchdown in Week 2. Big Ben also threw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and a pick. He played well, and I believe this combination was a big piece, outside of the injuries sustained by the Broncos, to the puzzle that was the Steelers' Week 2 victory. Now, I didn't have the Broncos winning this week against the Steelers, even with Lock, but considering how close Driscoll got them, I now wonder if Lock would have been able to overcome the odds and win that game had he not been injured. Defensively, the Steelers put on great pressure with 7 total sacks, a brilliant day overall in the pass rush, and the lone interception gives the secondary a bit of a pass on the large amount of yards, along with the 2 touchdowns they led up to a banged-up Broncos squad. Overall, though, the Steelers are setting themselves up well to make the playoffs this season, while the Broncos are not. Next up, we've got the Colts against the Vikings, a game that revived the hearts of some and finished off the hearts of others. The Vikings put up an ugly 11 points after putting up 34 on the Packers and let up 28 points to the Phillip Rivers-led Colts. Not to mention, the Colts lost a key defensive player, Anthony Barr, who will miss the rest of the 2020 season. Now, why I say that some fans' hearts were finished off is because of Kirk Cousins' terrible, almost comedic performance on Sunday. He threw a laughable 113 yards on 26 pass attempts, completing just 11 total passes. Not to mention he threw 3 picks to no touchdowns. Granted, one of these picks was on a Hail Mary attempt, but even 2 picks to no touchdowns is laughable for a quarterback getting paid as much as Kirk is, not to mention just how many second chances the Vikings organization and their fans have given Kirk Cousins. Last season, the party seemed to be getting started as the Vikings wide receivers called out Kirk Cousins, and, in return, Kirk picked up his game and played well to end out the season, but, this year, things are taking a turn for the worse as the Vikings start out 0-2, and Kirk looked like a 5th-round rookie quarterback against the Colts defense. Now, it'd be one thing if this was a one-time thing, but it's not. You can't have a quarterback who routinely needs his receivers to call out his lackluster, borderline terrible blips of play every few games in order to right the ship. And simply in general, you can't have a franchise guy who puts up performances like this multiple times a year, no matter how well he plays in other matchups. Kirk Cousins killed the Vikings on Sunday, and I can't seem to find any sort of excuse to give him. As for the Colts, things look good. They're at a 1-1 record, which isn't a bad place to be considering the quarterback change that took place this offseason. Rivers threw pretty accurately with just 1 pick on the day. The run game was also solid with over 150 yards and a touchdown on the ground collectively. And while I don't have much to say about the Colts following this one, as the game was seemingly decided by Vikings poor play, I can say that the Colts have a good chance of being either at 3-2 or 2-3 by week 5, both of which being solid spots in terms of playoff hopes for this Colts team. Second to last game I'm going to go over here, we got the Patriots against the Seahawks. Sunday Night Football, easily the best game of the season so far. Now, right away for this game, can we just take a second to talk about the performances by the Patriots offensive players? I mean, Cam Newton did great. He is clearly fallen right into Bill Belichick's system, and honestly, I think Bill Belichick is the mastermind behind this. Cam Newton obviously has a lot left in his tank. Cam Newton is a beast. We see that now. That's not out of the question now. That is for sure. But I think that we also need to pay attention to, I think a big part of this comes from Bill Belichick's ability to build an offense and to build a system around Cam Newton. 30 completions, 444 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 pick for Cam Newton. I mean, he played great. He really played great. And he just showed how unstoppable he can be on the ground, especially at the goal line, except for the last play, of course. But on the ground, through the air, he showed that he's still got it. And Bill Belichick showed that he built a system, he built a team that is going to rally around Cam Newton and use Cam Newton to push this team into the playoffs. Julian Edelman had 8 catches for 179 yards, a career high in yardage for the 34-year-old receiver. 2 games with Cam Newton, he already has a career high in receiving yards. N'Keal Harry also impressed. 8 catches for 72 yards. Those are both career highs, which is great to see. N'Keal Harry didn't really do much last season in his rookie year. He's a first-round pick. He was injured for the majority of the season. He comes in, doesn't get more than 3 catches in a game. This season, he starts out well in both the first 2 games, 5 catches in week 1 and here 8 catches in week 2. He's shaping out to be a solid number 2 choice for Cam Newton to go through. And if he keeps evolving as the games go on, he could very well be a very solid number 1 choice at the end of the season. And Damiere Byrd also showed up today, 6 catches for 72 yards. Bill Belichick showed that it was the pass game today that they were going to rely on, and they did. And it was there. Those receivers showed up. Those 3 that I just mentioned really showed up. The game was great to watch. I mean, it was great just to see the quarterback play. I mean, Wilson throwing bombs to DK Metcalf, to Lockett. I mean, he was on point. Cam Newton was on point. The receivers were on point. It was just a fun game to watch. It came all the way down to the final play. The last drive, I mean, the Julian Edelman catch for one. Cam Newton threw a brilliant bomb to Julian Edelman. I remember it was a great play to see because Bill Belichick every once in a while does this. And I remember the last season, they did it a few times with Edelman, and pretty much every time Brady just threw it a little far out for Edelman to catch. But here he does it for the first time this season, and it works out really well. Julian Edelman, he's known for just going out 5 yards, going out 6 yards, cutting to the right. Or maybe going out 15, 20 yards, cutting to the right. Well, what he did on this play, with Jamal Adams covering him, granted, one of the best secondary players in the league covering him, he goes out in the slot, he runs up, takes a shortcut to the right after about 6 yards, as per the usual. That's Edelman's go-to route. He does it. And then he fools Jamal Adams, because right then Jamal Adams is thinking, all right, this is what Edelman does, this is what he's doing. So he plays for that kind of slant route, and then Julian Edelman, boom, cuts upfield. And Julian Edelman isn't super fast, but with how quickly he cut, he got a good head start on Jamal Adams, and he didn't have to run very far upfield for Cam Newton to notice he was open by just a step. And Julian Edelman leapt out and got a great grab deep down the field. It was a brilliant play. Julian Edelman had some brilliant plays on Sunday night. He looked like a star, and quite honestly, he is one for that Patriots team. Now, the last drive of the game was also impressive. I mean, Cam Newton, last drive of the game, he's got just under 2 minutes to go. He needs to come up with a clutch drive. This is what Brady has always done. It's what Patriots fans love most about him, his clutch ability. When he was in these situations, he won almost every single time. Cam Newton goes all the way down the field. And not to mention, N'Keal Harry, 3 catches on that drive, all for over 10 yards. N'Keal Harry was really clutch. That's great to see from the rookie man, or the second-year man, who really didn't do much in his rookie year. It's great to see. He's developing, and honestly, I think one of Brady's biggest weaknesses last year was he didn't trust the rookie receivers. He didn't trust those first-year guys. Cam Newton does. He threw it to him on that drive, and it worked out well. They move all the way down the field, and honestly, I think it was just a bad play call. I don't hate the play call, but it obviously wasn't the right play call at that point by Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick. Cam Newton did everything right on that drive. There wasn't anything he could do on that last play to change it. The only thing I was really kind of confused about was, I think there was about 18 seconds left, 18 or 19 seconds left. They hit, I don't remember exactly who it was, but they hit one of the receivers right on the left side of the field, and he stays in bounds. So the clock's running, and everyone's just kind of jogging the field. And I'm like yelling at my TV. I'm like, guys, you got 18 seconds left. Every second that you spend jogging is one less play at the goal line. And they blew a good 12 seconds just lining up to run that next play. They hit N'Keal Harry at the 2-yard line, which was great. It was a great play to see, but they blew a good 12 seconds doing it. If you call that timeout right there, that gives you a good 3 to 4 plays to get it in the end zone. Because, even if they don't call the timeout there, if they just hurry it up, they could have saved easily 6 seconds there. You hit N'Keal Harry on that catch then you have 8 seconds at the goal line with a timeout. That gives you a shot for at least one time to throw it. You say, hey, Cam Newton, we're going to give you the ball, we're going to let you throw it, or we're going to do kind of an option play where we've got receivers in the end zone, we've got an open route for you to run the ball in, and if nothing's there, just throw it out the back of the end zone, man. That's all you got to do. We got 8 seconds, we got 2 plays, but instead they blow 12 seconds running to the line without calling a timeout when they had 1 timeout left. Then they throw it to N'Keal, they call the timeout, but there's only 2 seconds left, so now you only have 1 play when you could have had 3 at the goal line. I mean, honestly, it was just a really confusing coaching decision there by Bill Belichick. I didn't understand it. It was arguably more confusing than the play call. I mean, the play call wasn't terrible. It had worked 2 times before in that game, getting Cam Newton into the end zone. It had worked. It's not like that play wasn't working. It was very high percentage in that game. It made sense to run it again. Honestly, what I think would have been good for them, though, was to at least have one receiver, maybe Edelman far out wide, or Damiere Byrd, or even N'Keal Harry out wide. Or here, in my eyes, this is what you do in that scenario, because the Seahawks know for sure now that is a run play. I mean, you ran it the first time, they didn't really know, but it was pretty obvious because the fullback went up. It's like there's nobody out wide. It's pretty clear it's going to be a quarterback run. The second time you run it in a row, they kind of know what's coming, but they don't really know for sure. They know there could be a little play action here, but it ends up being the same play. Now, the third time in a row, it's the exact same formation. They know what's coming. They're going to go all out for the run. That's when you need to put 2 receivers out wide, maybe even 1. 2 receivers off the line, at the very least, just to free up the line, because that's 2 less players you have to worry about stopping that run. Because no matter what, it's a 10-on-11 for Cam Newton. He's got 10 blockers, they've got 11 defenders. 1 guy's going to get through. And 1 guy did. Honestly, 2 guys did, and they made a great play on that ball. The fullback, Jacob Johnson, missed the block, but it was a great defensive play. I don't really blame the fullback there. It was just a really great defensive play. But in the end, that play call, in my eyes, it wasn't a terrible choice when you're thinking about it statistically. But in the end, I mean, you got to think to yourself, hey, at the very least, can we have 1 receiver out wide? At the bare minimum, if they put 1 receiver out wide and just ran a type of RPO, where you have Edelman run across the middle while they're doing this same type of play, still with Jacob Johnson, still with 2 tight ends, and you have him run this play, but you also give him the shot of like, hey, because he took a stutter step there. Cam Newton took a stutter step on that play. He didn't just grab it and charge for the end zone. He took a stutter step before he started going to the end zone. I don't know why, because it's not like there was another option for him. He should have just gone charging right away and tried to immediately just plunge his way into the end zone. But he didn't on any of the plays in which they ran that play. And I think it's kind of partly to try and fool the defense to make him kind of second guess to completely charge the run. But either way, I think they should have ran an RPO in which you have that same play, but you just put Edelman out wide. Take 1 blocker off, put Edelman out wide, because then it's now a 10-on-9, 9 blockers, 10 defenders rushing the ball. But now you also have to, because they're going to double team Edelman on that play, they're going to hold one of the linebackers, one of the safeties off, because they're not going to let Edelman be one-on-one in the end zone with the game on the line. They know Edelman can beat that if he's running a slant route. So they're not going to let him do that. They're going to put 2 on Edelman to be safe. And then you've got a 9-on-9 scenario rather than an 11-on-10 in terms of blocking, which even if you aren't going to pass it, it makes it easier to run it in. And it makes the defense second guess, hey, maybe they're going to pass it here. Let's not rush all 11 at the goal line. I just think, and if Edelman's open and the run isn't there, Cam can kind of step back in the pocket for a second and maybe just kind of try and dart one in, even if it's covered. And I feel like that's still a better shot. It gives you a much higher percent to win, not only because the blocking is now even in terms of how many players you have to block, 9-on-9, because they're going to double team Edelman. But not only that, but also if the run isn't there, you can always look at Edelman. Who knows? He might have like a little split second there where he's open, and if Cam can hit that, it's a touchdown. So, I hate to criticize it because it wasn't a terrible choice by Josh McDaniels, but it's just in that scenario with the game on the line, you got to be a little more creative. You can't run such a predictable play with the game on the line. You just can't. Could Brady have gotten it in? That's a question a lot of people are asking. I think it's hard to say. That's what Brady seemed to be best at. I think Brady would have gotten it in for sure had they run a pass play. Although there have been times in history where Brady has not gotten it in. You look at the AFC Championship for Super Bowl 50. I mean, Brady had one pass play to try and get it in the end zone for a 2-point conversion. Didn't get it in. So, I mean, there have been times in which Brady hasn't done it, but I know that's a question I've seen a lot of people asking, especially Patriots fans. But, I mean, that wasn't Cam Newton's fault at all. It was the play calling, and the play calling wasn't terrible. Now, for the Seahawks, Wilson is putting together what looks to be an MVP season. He's simply playing amazing. And in this game, he continued to impress. Wilson had 288 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception, which was tipped by Greg Olsen. A total of 9 touchdowns through the first 2 games. Theoretically, on pace for 72 touchdowns through the air. Even if you give him an average of 2.5 touchdowns for the remainder of the season each game, which is more than fair considering he put up 5 against the Patriots secondary, he ends the season with 44 passing touchdowns, an MVP-level year. The run game was also much better this week, putting up over 100 yards on the ground and simply looking more reliable and consistent on the ground overall rather than in week 1. Now, one thing the Seahawks really need to worry about going forward is the pass rush. Bruce Irvin is out for the year, and the Seahawks didn't get any pressure on Cam Newton really throughout the game. Cam Newton did not get pressure. He had a lot of time to throw. I think that was a big reason Cam Newton played so well, and I was surprised by how good the Patriots O-line played considering how bad they were last year. I mean, Cam Newton had a lot of time to throw. You can't have that when you have a guy like Cam Newton. He's a guy that is great on the ground. You need to get pressure on him. And he's also great through the air, so you need to get the ball out of his hands quickly, especially when the Patriots have receivers that will not beat you one-on-one. And that will not beat you over the top. They're going to go for in-the-middle, underneath plays. So, get pressure on the quarterback. Make him throw it quickly. They're not going to beat you over the top unless you give them a whole ton of time. These guys aren't speed burners. Damiere Byrd isn't going to run down the field in 4.5 seconds. He's going to need a little more time than that, and arguably he's not going to run that many routes like that. So they got to get a better pass rush. And now Bruce Irvin out, that becomes much harder, but they got to find a way to do it if they want to keep winning into the future. So yeah, next up we've got the Panthers against the Bucs. Tom Brady played great, but 2 touchdown passes were dropped. He could have had 4 touchdown passes easily that game, along with over 100 yards and catches, including a 50-yard bomb, were dropped. And I'm not talking about drops such as the Edelman drop on Sunday night, the play before the N'Keal Harry play in which he threw it to Edelman and it slipped through his hands, but it was way up in the air. He really leaped for it, and it was just a really hard catch to make overall. I'm talking about catches that NFL receivers should make easily, right in the hands in a comfortable position that NFL receiver trains in practice all the time to get. The 50-yard bomb, it bounced off the guy's helmet, and it wasn't, I mean, if it bounces off your helmet, it is not insanely uncatchable in any way. But it was a good throw, a really great throw by Brady, really deep, perfect throw, and it bounces off the guy's helmet. I mean, what are you doing, man? Granted, he was pretty much an unnamed dude, rookie receiver, but I think he was a track star too, but the announcer even said, running fast does not equate to NFL success. We've seen that many times before, and you see it again here. And yeah, he was right. Brady and that offense looked solid, though. They put up 31 points. Fournette impressed with over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. I really liked how he played. Gronk has been... before I talk about Gronk, Arians said that Tom Brady played great. So, bite on that, social media. You remember last week when Arians was kind of trashing Brady, kind of critiquing him for the media to bite onto. They went crazy with it. Well, Arians said Tom Brady played great. So, bite on that. Now, Gronk has virtually been non-existent in the pass game with only 2 targets on Sunday, one resulting in a defensive pass interference flag and the other resulting in an interception. So, he seems a little slow both with the playbook as well as running freely through the field on routes. And O.J. Howard seems to be the leading run for the starting tight end job through the year right now. I talked about that before the season began. I said, it's not really sold whether Gronk or O.J. Howard is going to lead the receiving game. I said it could possibly be even, but I said it could kind of switch either way, and right now it's looking like O.J. Howard's going to win that race. Up to this point, Gronk could surprise us if he gets more comfortable, but up to this point, it's been the O.J. Howard show through the year. But Gronk has been great in run blocking, and that dude's a freak of nature in terms of raw strengths. Don't just think that Gronk has been really a non-factor. I mean, he's been great in the run game. He has put up some great lead blocks, and it's a big reason Fournette played really well on Sunday. It's because of Gronk's blocking. Now, going over to the Panthers lost McCaffrey, who played great once again on Sunday. Like I said earlier, that's a big loss. He is the key in the ignition for that offense. And Bridgewater threw a lot of yards on Sunday, but he also had 2 interceptions, one of which ended what could have been a come-from-behind victory as the Bucs were up 21-0 at half. The Bucs were up 21-0 at half, and for the good part of the third quarter, the Bucs were held scoreless, and they weren't able to move the ball really at all. So props to the Panthers defense for really coming in out of halftime and putting on a show there defensively in terms of being able to slow down that Bucs offense. I thought Brady was going to throw 400 yards. He threw over 200 yards in the first half, but didn't break 300 yards on the game. So I was under the impression that Brady could throw 400 that game, but man, the Bucs offense was unable to move it and unable to get open receivers and unable to really run the ball in the third quarter. Now, in the fourth quarter, they pulled away. They got a defensive turnover. They pulled away and were able to score 2 more touchdowns, which is great. Or no, I think it was a touchdown and a field goal. So that was good. But overall, the Panthers defense played well, considering the weapons that the Bucs have. The Panthers defense played well. But you also have to remember, Chris Godwin was out. It was great to see, I believe Mike Evans had a great game. He had over 100 yards. He had a touchdown. It was great to see that by Mike Evans, especially when he was held just 1 catch for a touchdown in the Week 1 matchup. So it was great to see that by Mike Evans in Week 2. But overall, the Bucs still have work to do. They still need to build off this more. Scotty Miller wasn't much of a factor in Week 2. Chris Godwin was out. So once those receivers get back, once Chris Godwin is back, it's going to be nice to see how this offense rolls in Week 3. They've had now 2 weeks to get used to each other. Let's see how they roll in Week 3. Now, with that, I'll end off this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a good 53.5 minutes here. I will see you on Thursday with my Week 3 predictions, as well as my storylines going into Week 3, so tune into that, and check out the YouTube page for any other game recaps that were not included in this podcast. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you Thursday morning.